There is a lot of talk about refugees and a refugee crisis in much of the world right now, and there often appears to be some confusion about what a refugee actually is. The internationally accepted definition of a refugee is someone who is unable or unwilling to return to their country of origin owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. There are a myriad of different reasons why people seek refuge, from being a member of the LGBT community somewhere where it is unsafe to be LGBT, or environmental refugees, which may force people to relocate due to droughts, monsoons, or rising sea levels. Whilst the definition of a refugee that I just read out was defined by the UN's 1951 Refugee Convention, there have been refugees for as long as there has been violence, and that means since the dawn of man. During World War II, for example, Britain took an estimated 70,000 Jewish refugees from continental Europe who were fleeing persecution, many of whom settled in North London and made huge contributions to British society. Indeed, refugees have made enormous contributions to virtually every society that has ever accepted them, and football is no exception. There were over 25 million refugees worldwide in 2017, including men, women and children, which means that if the world's displaced people were a country of their own, they would form a larger nation than Australia or the Netherlands. It should come as no surprise then that there have been many great refugee footballers over the years, and the number of refugees in the game is only growing. I should point out that I have tried to use the UN's definition of a refugee as the basis for this video, and that I am only including players who were themselves refugees, not the offspring of parents or previous generations who were displaced before they were born. I was originally going to base the 11 on ability, but ultimately I chose to include a bit more variation and pick some players just because of their backstories. I could easily have made 2 whole starting 11s of purely Kosovar Albanian refugees, so that should give you some idea of the number of players we're talking about here. Without further ado then, here is my refugee 11. Goalkeeper: Steve Mandanda. There are a handful of international goalkeepers who were once refugees within the world of football right now, including one who represents the reigning world champions. Steve Mandanda was born in Kinshasa, the capital of DR Congo, although the country was known as Zaire when he was born. When Mandanda was only 1 year old, the First Congo War broke out, which overthrew dictator Mobutu Sese Seko, but didn't bring an end to the nation's troubles. Mandanda's family sought refuge in France when the child was only 2 years old, and his 3 brothers, all of whom are also goalkeepers, were born in France. Mandanda has gone on to become Marseille's all-time leading appearance holder, having played 552 games for the club across a 12-year span, either side of a single season at Crystal Palace. The 35-year-old has also won 33 caps for France, often serving as a deputy to Hugo Lloris, and his family nicknamed him Frenchie after he chose to represent Les Bleus. If you want to learn more about the troubles that face Zaire and now DR Congo under President Mobutu and in the decades since, and how they relate to football, just search for HITC Sevens Zaire, since I made what I thought was quite a good video about the topic around 3 months ago. Right back. Hakim AlArabi. Australia is a nation that has had a very mixed record and multiple different policies when it comes to offering asylum. As many as 500,000 European refugees are believed to have been accepted by Australia during World War II, but Australia is now the only country on Earth which employs a system of mandatory offshore detention for refugees, a practice that is condemned by human rights groups and has even been likened to concentration camps. Hakim AlArabi is one refugee who Australia have done well by in recent years, after he fled from Bahrain in 2013. Bahrain has had an ever-deteriorating human rights record since 2010, and as a critic of the ruling monarchy, AlArabi was sentenced to 10 years in prison by a phony trial. He managed to escape whilst on bail, but was almost returned to Bahrain whilst on his honeymoon in 2018 in Thailand. AlArabi and his wife were held for 2 months by the Thai authorities before the international pressure became too great, and they allowed him to return to Australia, supposedly at the request of the Bahraini authorities. AlArabi can play as a right back or centre back, and the former Bahrain international plays his club football for semi-professional third-tier side Pascoe Vale in Melbourne these days. Centre back: Dejan Lovren. Whilst I didn't want to flood this 11 with players who fled the conflicts in Bosnia and Kosovo, there will be a couple of special inclusions. Dejan Lovren is one of them, having been born to Bosnian Croat parents in modern-day Bosnia and Herzegovina whilst it was still part of Yugoslavia. Lovren told the story of his life as a refugee powerfully in a 20-minute documentary produced by Liverpool in 2017, in more depth than I can go into here, but as a background, the Bosnian War broke out when Lovren was only 3 years old. His family fled to Germany, where they spent 7 years, but unable to secure permanent residence, they relocated to Croatia when Lovren was 10 years old. Lovren has since won 61 caps for Croatia and been able to drag his family out of poverty through his success in the sport, currently starring for Zenit St. Petersburg following his 3 years at Anfield. Centre-back. Rio Mavuba. Okay, I know what you're all thinking. Rio Mavuba is a central midfielder, but there were too many fascinating stories that I had to fit into my midfield, and I couldn't leave Rio Mavuba out altogether. Mavuba's father was a member of the trailblazing Zaire team at the 1974 World Cup, meanwhile his mother was Angolan. Whilst pregnant in 1984, Mavuba's mother gave birth to him on a boat whilst the family were in the process of fleeing from the Angolan Civil War. As such, Mavuba never had a nation of birth, and he wasn't awarded French citizenship up until 2004. Mavuba lost his mum aged 2 and his father at 14, at which point he threw himself into football as a way of escaping depression. He went on to star for Bordeaux and Lille, winning a league title with the latter and winning 13 caps for France, representing Les Bleus at the 2014 World Cup. Aged 36, Mavuba now plays in France's lower leagues. Left back. Alphonso Davies. The Second Liberian Civil War displaced close to 500,000 people, and one of them is now arguably the best left-back on earth. Alfonso Davies' parents are Liberian, but they fled from the nation's capital when the violence erupted. Davies' mother gave birth to him in a refugee camp in Ghana in November of 2000, but the family wouldn't find a permanent home until they settled in Edmonton, Canada, when Davies was 5 years old. A promising young footballer, Davies became the youngest USL player of all time when he signed for Vancouver Whitecaps too, shortly after turning 15. He went on to star for the Vancouver Whitecaps first team in the MLS before making a move to Bayern Munich, where he has been nothing short of a revelation. Davies received Canadian citizenship in 2017, meaning he could represent the Canadian national team, and he has since won 17 caps at the age of only 19. Central midfield. Luka Modric. I said I wasn't picking this 11 based only on footballing talent, and I'm not, but we do have some serious talent in midfield nonetheless, starting with Luka Modric. The 2018 Ballon d'Or winner is among the finest midfielders of a generation, and you could even argue that he is the greatest Croatian footballer of all time. Modric has become a legend at arguably the biggest club in the world, Real Madrid, and he will soon become Croatia's most capped player of all time. But this tale of glittering success has more modest beginnings. Both of Modric's parents worked in a knitwear factory, and when he was only 6 years old, the Croatian War of Independence broke out. Modric's parents fled the area, but his grandfather, also named Luka, wasn't so fortunate. Luka Sr. was executed by Serb rebels who burnt the Modric house down to the ground, and Luka Jr. and his family would spend the next 7 years living in hotels as refugees. It was in the car parks of these hotels that Modric gained his earliest footballing education, and he has often said that his tough upbringing helped shape him as a person. Central midfield. Eduardo Camavinga. Luka Modric has been one of the best midfielders in world football over the last 10 years at Real Madrid. Meanwhile, Eduardo Camavinga has the potential to be one of the best over the next 10 years and is reportedly among Real Madrid's primary long-term transfer targets. Camavinga's parents are Congolese, and they fled from Kinshasa during the Second Congolese War. Camavinga was born in a refugee camp in Angola in 2002, and the family moved to France when he was only 2 years old. They settled in Brittany, and Camavinga joined the youth ranks at Rennes, aged 11. He's already a star man at Rennes, aged 17, and a full international for the strongest national team on earth. Central midfield. Mahmoud Dahoud. It's no secret that Syria has faced one of the greatest humanitarian crises on the planet for many years, and we may well see many more Syrian refugee footballers in the years that come. Mahmoud Dahoud is the most prominent of them right now as a full German international who plays for Borussia Dortmund. Roughly 84% of all the world's refugees are taken in by poor or developing countries, but among the wealthier Western nations, no one takes more refugees in than Germany, who accepted over 1 million refugees in 2019 alone, compared to just 133,000 in the United Kingdom and 341,000 in the United States. Mahmoud Dahoud's family fled from the Syrian town of Amuda shortly after he was born to flee the Assad regime. The 24-year-old began his career with Borussia Mönchengladbach, but now plays for Borussia Dortmund, where he faces a fight for a starting berth up against the likes of Thomas Delaney and Axel Witsel in midfield. Right wing, Victor Moses. As I said, the UK takes relatively few refugees, fewer than the likes of Austria and Rwanda that have only 10% of the UK's population in fact, but there have still been some refugees who have made a contribution to the British game. Many refugees to the UK come from former British colonies due to a common language often being spoken, and that was the case with Victor Moses. Moses was born in Nigeria to a Christian pastor, but in 2002, his family were caught up in the Miss World riots. Conservative Muslims protested the pageant being held in Nigeria during Ramadan, leading to some 250 deaths. Among those 250 deaths were both of Moses' parents, killed when he was only 11 years old and he was playing football at the time. Moses' surviving family paid for him to travel to the UK and seek asylum, where he was taken into foster care in South London. He began his career at Crystal Palace and now plays for Spartak Moscow on loan from Chelsea. Moses represented England at youth level, but Nigeria at senior level, winning 38 caps between 2012 and 2018. Left wing, Ava Mabel. One of the Socceroos' brightest sparks right now is a wide man who was born in Kenya to South Sudanese parents, and I'd like to apologise since I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing his name wrong. South Sudan is another of the world's great humanitarian disasters and has been locked in a state of civil war or civil unrest for virtually all of the last 40 years. Ava Mabel's parents sought to escape the cycle of violence before he was born, and his mother gave birth to him in the Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya. Mabel spent the first 11 years of his life living in the refugee camp in Kakuma, before his family were granted asylum in Australia. Following a couple of seasons with Adelaide United as a youngster, Mabel joined current club FC Midtjylland in 2015, where he has since become a key man. Aged 25, Mabel made his Australia debut in 2018, and he became a regular fixture for the Socceroos in 2019. Centre forward, Saido Berahino. There are better ex-refugee centre-forwards out there than Saido Berahino, but few with more harrowing tales, and I wanted to include the former Premier League marksman because he has come in for an awful lot of stick. Whilst clearly you cannot excuse all personal flaws on the grounds of trauma or a difficult upbringing, and I'm sure Berahino has behaved poorly in the past, I'm not sure how many people are aware of his background in full. Benrahino was born in Burundi, which is often cited by a number of different measures as being the poorest country on earth. When he was 4 years old, Berahino's father was killed in the Burundian Civil War. At the age of 10, he travelled alone to England to live with his mother and siblings in Birmingham, but he couldn't find them when he first arrived in the UK. As such, Benrahino was put into a care home before his mother was reunited with him, with a DNA test being required in order for him to take him home with her. Benrahino's love of football was his outlet as a child, and he burst onto the scene at West Bromwich Albion. Following interest from Tottenham Hotspur and almost playing for England, Benrahino subsequently suffered a serious decline. He went an incredible 913 days without scoring a goal before leaving Stoke City, and he now plays his club football in Belgium and his international football for Burundi. So that is my Refugees 11, but as I said, I didn't necessarily pick the best players, just some that had interesting or often harrowing tales that a lot of people might not know about. Otherwise, I would have included the likes of Xherdan Shaqiri, Miralem Pjanic and Josip Ilicic. There are so many other ex-refugee footballers that you might not know about, whether it be Danish international Pione Sisto, Crystal Palace striker Christian Benteke, or former Manchester United midfielder Adnan Januzaj. Every one of them having been forced to flee a country at some stage and having been shown humanity by a nation who welcomed them in. I honestly had a shortlist of about 100 players I could have included, and the strongest possible 11 that I could have formed would probably be good enough to reach the quarterfinals of a World Cup if they were an independent national team, which is quite something. Anyhow, thank you all for watching. I won't promote any refugee charities or urge you not to read the Daily Mail since I've done enough virtue signalling for one YouTube snowflake for today. But there are a number of them out there, and most of you already know that the Murdoch press is the equivalent of raw sewage without me having to tell you. Hit the like button if you enjoyed today's video, let me know your thoughts in the comments, and make sure to subscribe to HITC Sevens if you're a fan of the channel. Oh, and you can also find me on Twitter and Instagram by the username @HITC Sevens on both platforms.